Hi, everybody. This is Mr. Zoeller, and today I'm going to be presenting to you about the Declaration of Independence. And we'll be looking at our history book in Chapter 6. So 6.2, the Revolutionary War begins. So George Washington is going to be put in command of the Continental Army, and he's going to be chosen as the leader of the army due to his military experience during the French and Indian War, and also because he is from the most prominent and powerful colony of all, Virginia. And so, because of his military experience and because of the actions he has done in Virginia, and because he is from Virginia itself, he's going to be given command of the army of the colonies. So, we're going to call that the Continental Army. So the first major battle that's going to take place after the battles of Lexington and Concord is going to happen at the Battle of Bunker Hill. So this battle is actually going to take place at what's called Breed's Hill, which is right next to it. And so the colonists had surrounded the city of Boston, and the British are trying to drive them off of it. So they end up going up that hill 3 different times, attacking, and eventually the colonists run out of gunpowder, and they have to start throwing rocks and whatever else they can find at the British. But in the end of this battle, more than 1,000 British troops are going to be killed or wounded, and around 500 for the Americans as well. So it's the bloodiest engagement of the entire Revolutionary War. But it did prove that the colonists did not just turn and run when the British came. They stood and fought. And that proves later on that they're going to be willing to do that in the future. So it's going to be a very, very bloody affair. And we'll have a famous saying from this battle as the troops are told on the top of the hill, the Continental Army, that don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes, saying we're almost out of gunpowder, so whatever shots you make need to count. You need to be able to see the British soldier very, very close, so make everything count. So here's a picture here showing the attack on that hill, and you can see even here in the background that the British Navy is going to be engaging the colonists on top of the hill. So for the siege of Boston, so for Fort Ticonderoga is located in New York, so the colonists need to find some artillery and cannons they can use to get the British troops out of Boston because they're stuck there. So the Continental Army only had about 36 barrels of gunpowder in total, and so they only had about 9 shots per man. So one of Washington's strategies early on during the war was to deceive or to fool the British into thinking that they had a lot more. So he is sending out messages to messengers, and one of them ends up being captured by the British, and the British believe that the colonists actually have about 1,800 barrels of gunpowder. And so Henry Knox, who's pictured down here, is going to be sent by General Washington along with other colonists to go to Fort Ticonderoga, which was only occupied by a small number of British troops, and they're going to be able to take the cannons from there and bring them to the old, from that British fort, and all the way they're going to bring them to Boston, so for the siege of Boston, so the British are eventually going to abandon Boston, and you can see here that it's really hard for the British to leave by land. They're completely surrounded here in land by artillery, eventually by the colonists. So as long as the colonists do not have any artillery, the British can just stay there and decide what they want to do. And of course, they have their navy where they would be able to move as much as they needed to. So on March 4th, 1776, lines of cannons are going to be aimed at Boston, surrounding the city. And General Howe, in command of the British troop, is going to order his troops to evacuate Boston, and his troops are going to head north up into Canada to regroup and to assess what to happen. So feel free to pause the video and take a look at this map and see where things were located, and also to see the trip from Fort Ticonderoga here all the way to Massachusetts and what that entailed. All right, so 6.4, toward independence. So the colonists are going to meet, and we're going to have the Continental Congress, and they're going to send the Second Continental Congress, the second meeting. The colonists decide that they're going to send a letter of petition to the king, to the government, asking the British to seek peace in this. And so this is called the Olive Branch Petition. An olive branch is a symbol of peace. And when the colonists finally get the message back from the king, they're told not to meet anymore, and that their meetings and talks of fighting the British are acts of treason, and the king orders them all to be hanged if they continue to meet. And so while some colonists were kind of on the fence of should we fight for independence or not, the king is basically, with his statement, going to unite the colonies together. So one former English citizen who came to America is going to be Thomas Paine. And Thomas Paine is a strong patriot and believes that the colonies should be free from independence. So he writes a short pamphlet that's called Common Sense, and in a few months he had over 120,000 copies, And in his pamphlet, he's basically arguing that the Americans have suffered under the British for such a long period. We were forced to fight in the French and Indian War. We're forced to pay these taxes. The colonists are never represented in Parliament. And so Paine says it's time for the colonists to stand against the king. It makes sense. It's common sense. You're not being treated equally as you should be. You're forced to fight in these wars. You're forced to pay these taxes you never even voted on. And the British are not treating you as equals here in the colonies. And it's time for the colonists to recognize and say, we have rights and we're going to willing to fight for them.